This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Monday evening. I'm Oteli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. South Korean President Yoon is banned from foreign travel in the wake of his short-lived martial law decree. Well, the ruling party has also formed a task force to stabilize the nation and map out the leader's early resignation. Meantime, China calls for a political settlement and a restoration of stability and order in Syria, as Japan raises concerns about the country's deteriorating humanitarian situation. Now, China vows to firmly defend its sovereignty as Taiwan launches combat readiness drills in response to a surge in Chinese warships in waters around the island. Australia and Pacific nation Nauru ink a landmark economic and security deal aimed at countering China's growing influence in the region. Also, a shift in China's monetary policy stance, not seen since 2011. Top leaders vow to adopt a more relaxed approach next year as they hash out plans to boost Asia's #1 economy. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, Morris Chang, the 93-year-old founder of the world's largest contract chipmaker TSMC, launches a sequel to his autobiography. Nearly a week ago, South Korean President Yoon declared martial law in his country, the first time since 1980. It lasted about 6 hours and triggered days of political chaos. Now the Justice Ministry has stepped in, imposing a foreign travel ban on Mr. Yoon. And local media say that his governing People Power Party has formed a task force to stabilize the nation and handle the president's early resignation. Well, the main opposition Democratic Party, meantime, wants a vote on a bill seeking a special counsel probe into Mr. Yoon's martial law decree. It's hoping that will happen on Thursday. The party's lawmakers have also called for Mr. Yoon's immediate arrest after failing to secure the two-thirds majority needed to impeach him. The opposition plans to table another impeachment bill this Saturday and has accused the PPP of staging a second coup by not helping to impeach the president.
대한민국 헌정 질서를 파괴한 내란 주범, 군사 반란 주범 윤석열은 즉각 사퇴하거나 아니면 즉각 탄핵되어야 합니다.
South Korean prosecutors have been questioning former Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun, who was arrested yesterday. Now, he's alleged to have proposed the martial law idea to the president. Others, including Army Chief of Staff Park An-soo, are reportedly aiding investigations. General Park was named martial law commander by President Yoon. Now, Mr. Yoon's short-lived imposition of martial law last Tuesday plunged the country into its worst political crisis in decades. It sparked widespread demonstrations and calls for him to be removed. Now, for more on this, CNA's senior Korea correspondent Lee Sung joins us live now from Seoul. Yoon-suk, the ruling party, as we've mentioned, has established a task force to stabilize the state and handle Yoon's early resignation. What more can you tell us about this latest announcement?
Well, yes, there's been a meeting and series of meetings by the ruling party members all day. But after that one meeting, a member of the ruling party, Lee Sung, told the local media that a task force had been set up to ensure that there is order and stability in the country following this declaration of the martial law. But he didn't say what else, they discussed and whether they had a detailed plan as to when they were going to get President Yoon Suk-yeol out of the presidential office. And that is the crucial question, because all the facts that are coming out now from various people, especially the military, who were given the orders to go into the National Assembly and arrest the key politicians, are saying that it was just all the orders from the defense minister, ex-defense minister Kim Yong-hyun. The Special Forces officer Kim Hyun-tae was also telling the media earlier this morning that he bore all the responsibility for the raid on Parliament and that he was ordered, that he gave the orders to block the the troops from the lawmakers from entering the parliament now. And he was saying that the soldiers there who at the parliament that day were really just victims who were used by the ex-defense minister Kim Yong-hyun. And he was also, trying to fight back tears. And as he was telling the media that the soldiers were not guilty and that, if they were guilty, it was just following the orders of the commander, and that's him. And, following the comments from the defense ministry officials, the defense ministry and the military here now have been saying that they won't be following any more orders to execute another martial law here in South Korea, even if it was issued again.
Also, Yoon Suk, another interesting development is that the opposition party, they're set to table this other impeachment bill on Saturday. What do you think is going to come out of that? Yoon Suk, I'm afraid we have lost your audio, but perhaps we might be able to bring you back a little later. Anyway, that was CNA's Lee Suk speaking to us live from Seoul. Now, politicians aside, the focus on failed martial law decree in South Korea is also turning to the country's armed forces. The commander of the Special Forces unit that stormed the parliament says that they were ordered to prevent lawmakers from convening to void the martial law declaration. Colonel Kim Hyun-tae says that on the night of the martial law declaration, the Army's head of Special Warfare Command, Lieutenant General Kwak Jong-kun, asked him whether he could prevent 150 lawmakers from entering the National Assembly. Well, Kim has told reporters that the order seemed to have been issued by former Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun. The head of the Counter-Terrorism Unit, 707th Special Mission Group, Kim Hyun-tae, says that he will bear all legal responsibility, calling himself an incompetent and irresponsible commander.
전 김용현 국방장관에게 이용당한 가장 안타까운 패자입니다. 부대원들은 죄가 없습니다. 죄가 있다면 무능한 지휘관의 지시를 따른 죄뿐입니다.
Well, the revelation has prompted questions on military chain of command, with the Defense Ministry confirming in a press conference that Yoon Sung Yoon is still the Army's commander-in-chief.
내란 수계 피의자가 국군 통수권을 가져도 되나요?
가져도 되는지에 대한 판단을 물으시는 건가요? 법적으로는 현재 통수권자에게 있습니다, 권한이.
Right, and for more insights into South Korea's political crisis, we now speak with Lee Sung Yoon. Now, he is a global fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and he joins us from Seoul. Well, thanks for joining us this evening, Dr. Sung. First up, let's just talk about the opposition party who's vowed to reintroduce this impeachment motion against President Yoon. What do you think are the chances of success this time round? And also, how do you see the outcome impacting the country's political stability?
Well, in the wake of the shocking news of the declaration of martial law, even a few dozen members of the ruling party, pro-Yoon party, were professing that they are for impeaching the president. But things changed quite dramatically on the day of the previous attempt to impeach President Yoon. And basically everyone from the party boycotted the meeting. They did not vote. So the opposition party that is very bent on impeaching President Yoon lacks somewhere between 5 to 8 votes. And if they were to try again a few days later, as they have said they will, probably will see the same kind of stalemate. How long this kind of impasse can drag on, we don't know, but it's a very strange and troubling situation.
Yeah, well, Dr. Lee, it is troubling when you mention that this Saturday's outcome could possibly be the same as the previous impeachment process. Now, this whole legal investigation into President Yoon's alleged treason as well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it could drag on for months or even years. I mean, isn't there this pressing need for South Korea to resolve this crisis swiftly to restore some form of stability in its government?
Yes, absolutely. And the ruling party is grappling with how to present to the nation an acceptable, logical, rational way for President Yoon, whose political career is basically over, to step down, whether he is put in jail or not. Now, there's a compelling reason for the opposition party led by Mr. Lee Jae-myung, Mr. Lee, to accelerate the process because he's under serious criminal investigation. He's been found guilty in mid-November on one account, and he has the right to appeal to a superior court, which he has. And then if the superior court upholds the decision, the conviction by the lower court, Mr. Lee can appeal for the last time to the Supreme Court. But there is a limit, a deadline for each court, which is 3 months. So June 6th or so is really the deadline. That is, if Mr. Lee is able to win an ad hoc election, then while the Supreme Court is deliberating still, he can be elected legally as the president, whereas if he's found guilty by the Supreme Court after June 6th, he's ineligible. So there's a lot of political drama here.
Yeah, that we're all keeping a very keen eye on. Also, since South Korea became a democracy, do you think it has sufficiently prepared for this emergency situation or a crisis that requires martial law?
No, when I was a boy growing up in a very poor developing South Korea, curfews, martial law were everyday realities. Not that I had firsthand experience as a victim, but of course, martial law, that phrase conjures up very negative images all around the world. Tanks rolling into streets, city streets, soldiers firing live ammunition on unarmed protesters, arbitrary arrest, torture, and so on. So for South Korea that has such a dark past, to wake up to this stunning declaration, proclamation of martial law, it came as a tremendous shock to the entire nation.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's still fresh in a lot of people's minds when it comes to, curfews when martial law was enacted. I'm curious to know, Dr. Lee, in terms of South Korea right now, right, how equipped are they to, be able to effectively respond to emergencies or crises, right now, given the current state of disarray within its military and government?
Well, I think in terms of national emergency, it depends on the degree of the emergency. President Yoon claimed that we are in a state of national emergency as if we're in a state of active war, like Ukraine, for example, which clearly South Korea is not. But I think the South Korean government, the people, the leadership, the government agencies are competent enough to weather the storm. Things will be messy and things will remain uncertain for some time. But I think South Korea will come out of this as even a stronger democracy.
Now, I want to touch on Article 77 of South Korea's constitution, which basically grants the president the authority to impose martial law during severe national emergencies, which we saw. But lawmakers can also repeal it through this parliamentary vote. Do you think there's a need to amend this or maybe include some additional safeguards?
I'm not sure, but those safeguards already in place in Article 77, as you just mentioned, were in fact invoked and implemented. That is, we had a quorum of lawmakers who managed to make their way into the National Assembly building, and 190 people, more than half of the 300-person assembly, did vote to repeal, unanimously voted to repeal the declaration of martial law. So what could have been a night of bloodshed, maybe even bloodbath, thankfully was averted through an orderly legal system.
Yeah, we're thankful for that indeed. Also, based on recent events, what insights can be drawn from South Korea's military and also its relationship with the government?
Well, the military, South Korea has one of the world's most competent, strongest, if you will, militaries in the world. And South Korea is the world's number 7th or 8th arms exporting nation, on par with the United Kingdom, with Spain, and so on. Very few people are aware of that. But then, of course, South Korea is located in a very rough neighborhood. To the north, there's North Korea, nuked up, and China and Russia, also nuclear power. So the military has always been a locus of power, projecting South Korea's readiness in support, of course, by the United States in the firm alliance that the two nations have enjoyed since the Korean War. So South Korea is no joke, but one thing is there is a difference in pain threshold between a democracy and a dictatorship in terms of the ability to accept casualty numbers. So that is a major advantage for autocrats like Kim Jong-un in North Korea or Vladimir Putin in Russia.
So moving on, as this crisis is unfolding, how do you think it's going to affect South Korea's relationship with its regional neighbors that we talked about, North Korea, China, Japan?
Well, I would think that Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin, with their recent strategic military pact signed in Pyongyang back in June, and reports of over 10,000 North Korean soldiers sent to fight against Ukraine already there on the battlefield. All these are concerning developments to South Korea, to Japan, to the United States, to the democracies in Northeast Asia. So I would think that Putin and Kim are not so displeased by South Korea that seems to be doing a very good job of self-damage. Not quite self-destruction, but things are chaotic right now. And at the right time, they will try to make the most of this instability in South Korea, perhaps with a lethal provocation, as North Korea has resorted to many times in the past, perhaps another nuclear test and so forth. But it is a welcome development for Kim Jong-un and Putin.
Well, thanks for your insights. That was a great conversation. Dr. Lee Sung Yoon from the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. We're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, consumer inflation in China fails to perk up despite a flurry of stimulus measures. And later, Taiwan continues to ride the AI wave, exports in November expanding faster than expected. Hello again. Glad to have your company on East Asia tonight. Well, Roland Lim is standing by right now to update us with the very latest in the business world. And let's just talk about the major policy shift out of China. Top leadership basically saying that it would adopt a more relaxed approach to monetary policy next year. What's that all about?
You did hear right. That's Beijing's latest plans to deal with sluggish domestic consumption as well as the second term of Donald Trump in the White House. China's highest decision-making body, the Politburo, has signaled a shift in its monetary policy stance next year. It has announced to embrace a, quote, moderately loose approach to imply more easing is coming. The move comes as policymakers brace for the return of U.S. President-elect Donald Trump next month amid sluggish domestic consumption. Now, the easing is significant as it's the first such change in 14 years. Since 2011, policymakers have kept a pretty tight leash on monetary stimulus for fear of stoking inflation. The latest departure reflects an urgent need to spur a post-pandemic boom that has largely failed to materialize. Now, following a meeting today, the country's Politburo say they will implement what it calls a more proactive fiscal policy. That's a step up from just proactive previously. Now, this comes after an official Xinhua commentary last week that the country had room to increase its borrowing and fiscal deficit next year. This as the country set to hold its top annual economic policy meeting. That's the Central Economic Work Conference held by President Xi. That's the time when party leaders hold a meeting to hash out economic plans for 2025, as well as discuss policies to crack down on corruption. China's growth has stalled, dogged by weak domestic consumption on the back of a confidence-crushing property slump. Beijing has unveiled measures at rapid-fire speed, especially after piecemeal efforts in the past 2 years failed to boost growth. Measures which included interest rate cuts on mortgage holders, easing of restrictions for home buying, as well as a $1.4 trillion debt swap plan to ease local government debt. But economists say more direct fiscal stimulus is needed to restore full health in the country's economy as fears of a renewed trade war with the U.S. mount. Hong Kong equities had their biggest one-day rally in 7 weeks after China's top policymakers promised to be more proactive with fiscal stimulus. The Hang Seng Index jumping 2.8%, finishing above the 20,000-point mark for the first time since November 11th. Beijing and Shenzhen bourses, though, had less time to react to the readout from the December Politburo meeting as they finished trading much earlier on. China's consumer inflation stalled in November, suggesting Beijing's recent efforts to shore up faltering economic demand have had only limited impact. Consumer inflation rose 0.2% last month from a year ago, and that's a slower price growth compared to October, underscoring concerns about weak domestic demand persisting in the economy. Factory gate prices still in deflation for the 26th straight month, although the price decline has narrowed in November to negative 2.5%. China's producer prices have been experiencing deflation since October of 2022. Some analysts said that last month's producer deflation may have narrowed because of recent stimulus efforts. But the latest figures also highlight that Beijing's series of fiscal and monetary support this year may not have been enough to encourage households and businesses to spend, borrow, or lend to spur more economic activity. Taiwan exports last month increased more than expected from a year ago, brought in by a booming artificial intelligence industry, as well as a bounce in demand from top trading partner China. Exports surged by nearly 10% on year in November, beating market expectations. The jump was boosted by shipments to the US, which rose 10.6%, and mainland China, which increased to 9.5%. Meanwhile, imports also rose more than forecast, increasing 19.8% from a year earlier. And that led to a trade balance amounting to some $8 billion, which the ministry describes as favorable. A top trade analyst says that exporters' fears of increased tariffs from US President-elect Donald Trump could further push strong exports for December. The self-ruled island predicts that exports this month could rise between 4.5% and 7.5% on the year. A Japanese chipmaker, Kioxia, has priced its initial public offering at 1,455 yen. That's about $10 a piece. Now, that's in the middle of its previously projected price range. It plans to offer a total of some 82.7 million shares. At that price range, the listing is expected to raise some $800 million. And this values the Bain Capital-backed company at some $5.3 billion. Now, Kioxia plans to issue new shares, while two of its biggest stakeholders, that's Bain Capital and Toshiba, will sell part of their stakes. The IPO follows a major setback in October when Bain Capital reduced the initial valuation target from $10 billion. Kioxia is a major player in the memory chip industry and is set to debut on the Tokyo Stock Exchange on the 18th of this month. The IPO follows several large public offerings in Japan this year and comes on the heels of the Nikkei stock average reaching record highs earlier, boosted by stronger corporate earnings and a weak yen. A second reading of Japan's GDP shows that the economy grew more than expected in the third quarter. And that's a reason for optimism for the Bank of Japan as it considers a path forward on normalizing interest rates in a policy decision later this month. Annualized GDP expanded 1.2%, beating analyst estimates and picking up pace from the preliminary estimate. Now, the figure is still significantly lower than the 2.2% logged in the second quarter. This translates to an on-quarter growth rate of 0.3%, matching expectations and slightly higher than the first reading. The pickup was aided by an increase in private consumption, though the growth was a little less than expected. But the outlook remains clouded with a slight fall on quarter in business spending, with growth coming in from an increase in inventory. That's with US President-elect Donald Trump threatening tariffs globally. Japan's own net exports for the period took a little off the top on quarter GDP growth. And that is the latest in business. Oteli.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, we're going to go for another break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, we circle back to developments out of South Korea, and we'll be speaking to CNA's Grace Shin about the political crisis and issues around a probe for alleged treason. Plus, world leaders vow to work for stability in Syria and the broader region as China calls for a political settlement, while Japan expresses concern for the country's humanitarian situation. Hello again. You are watching East Asia Tonight. South Korean President Yoon Sung Yoon is banned from foreign travel in the wake of his short-lived martial law decree. The ruling party has also formed a task force to stabilize the nation and map out the leader's early resignation. China calls for a political settlement and a restoration of stability and order in Syria, as Japan raises concerns about the country's deteriorating humanitarian situation. And China vows to firmly defend its sovereignty as Taiwan launches combat readiness drills in response to a surge in Chinese warships in waters around the island. South Korean President Yoon Sung Yoon could face another impeachment attempt after narrowly surviving a vote on Saturday. Well, rallies for him to be removed from office evoke memories of the massive protests against disgraced former President Park Geun-hye 8 years ago. But there is some uncertainty over the implications of impeaching Mr. Yoon on domestic politics. CNA's Lee Sung Yoon has more.
South Korea's first female president, Park Geun-hye, apologized to the nation for creating national chaos after lawmakers in December 2016 voted overwhelmingly to impeach her over a corruption scandal. The vote was 234 to 56, with 6 abstentions. Following that vote, the country's constitutional court started to review the impeachment motion. And it was President Lee Sung Yoon, then a prosecutor, who was assigned to investigate the corruption scandal, which eventually led the Constitutional Court to vote for impeachment and removal from the presidential office in March 2017. 2 months later, then opposition leader Moon Jae-in was elected into office in a landslide victory. Nearly 8 years later, Yoon Sung Yoon is facing the possibility of being impeached, like then conservative leader Park Geun-hye. He has his supporters who say he should not be impeached and that they understand why he called for martial law.
대통령은 백성들이 뽑은 대통령입니다. 대통령의 모든 국정을 사사건건 탄핵을 했어요. 지금까지 대한민국의 헌정사에서 그런 것들을 국민들은 용납할 수가 없죠. 이런 나쁜 탄핵을 하고도 하는 세력들은 다 그 범법자들 그런 자들 추종하는 세력들이에요.
They fear that if President Yoon is impeached, then the head of the main opposition Democratic Party, Lee Jae-myung, will become the next leader of South Korea. Mr. Lee is facing legal troubles. In November, he was found guilty of violating election laws during the 2022 presidential election by lying about a bribery scandal involving development projects when he was mayor of Seongnam City in Gyeonggi Province. He was handed a 1-year suspended prison term. Mr. Lee has said he would appeal, but if he loses that appeal, he cannot run for president again in 2027. He has also been indicted on bribery and other criminal charges, accusations he has denied. And Cho Guk, head of another opposition party who's demanding Yoon's impeachment, also faces several charges, including using illicit means to get his children into prestigious schools. He was handed a 2-year sentence by the lower courts. Despite all this, the majority of South Koreans are calling for President Yoon to be impeached.
저는 너무 갑작스럽게 계엄령을 발표해서 이게 헌정 질서에 위반이 되는 상황이라 탄핵을 하는 게 맞지 않나라고 생각합니다.
지금 군 통수권자가 대통령이기 때문에 언제든 또 계엄령을 내릴 수 있는 가능성이 있어서 바로 탄핵을 해야 된다고 생각합니다.
Recent surveys show that more than 70% of South Koreans want President Yoon impeached. Conservatives in South Korea, including the ruling party members, agree that President Yoon must resign. But they fear that Mr. Lee Jae-myung will be elected president if President Yoon is impeached. And so it remains to be seen how the ruling party members will vote the second time around when the motion is again put to vote in Parliament as scheduled this Saturday. Lee Sung Yoon, CNA, Seoul.
And to shed more light on the treason investigations facing President Yoon and ex-defense minister Kim Yong-hyun, my colleague Grace Shin is joining us right now in the studio. Well, Grace, so I'm curious to know, on what grounds can a treason charge be applied in South Korea, and how do these conditions actually relate to the current president as well as the former defense minister?
Well, we'll have to look at Article 87 of the Criminal Act, where treason is defined as a riot conducted for the purpose of usurping the national territory or subverting the Constitution. And a person who is found guilty of this will be charged and penalized with either the death penalty or life imprisonment. And legal experts say that the treason conviction stands on Yoon and the man behind the supposed proposal of this martial law decree, which is ex-defense minister Kim Yong-hyun, because they allegedly deployed martial troops from going to the National Assembly and blocking parliament members from trying to nullify the martial law decree. And what's troublesome here is that they're claiming that it was done under force, which goes against the Constitution. Now, some other experts have different ideas, claiming that the president may be exempt from treason because, number one, it is his prerogative to be able to decree martial law. And secondly, treason charges don't stand because there was no violence involved with it. There was no casualties or injuries. Whereas for Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun, who is now ousted, prosecutors said that he was the one who actually drafted the military decree, which included clauses like no media censorship and calling back of all medical personnel and trainee doctors to return within 48 hours and prohibiting all political activities. So according to Article 32 of the Criminal Code, because he allegedly aided and abetted that requires actions that if the martial law in this case is considered treason, he would then be fallen guilty.
Right, and it sounds like there would be, a fair amount of investigations that they need to undergo to ensure whether it's treason or not. So tell us exactly what goes on during a treason charge. Walk us through the investigation process.
Well, this time around, we're seeing a lot of investigative bodies take aboard on the investigation. For instance, the prosecution is questioning the former defense minister Kim Yong-hyun. Police have formed a group of 150 people to investigate the case. We also saw the Corruption Investigation Office for High-Ranking Officials, short for CIO, impose a travel ban on the president, and it's the first time a sitting president actually has a travel ban against him. So we have to take note of how many competing probes are going on at the moment because people are questioning the efficiency of it. And more importantly, they're raising concerns about the potential bias within the law enforcement, especially as police may allegedly be involved with the martial law decree and how it was passed for the short-lived 6 hours that it was in place. And also, Yoon's past history as a prosecutor are raising questions as to whether the prosecution would be okay to be probing this case. So more argument and weight is for the Corruption Investigation Office for High-Ranking Officials, the CIO that was established back in the Moon administration. And as you can tell by the name, it is to probe against high-ranking officials for charges like corruption or the abuse of power. So as you can see, we are seeing many investigations go on. We're to see whether they are able to be arresting a sitting president, given that there's only 2 crimes that need to be filled. That's treason and insurrection. That is the only way we could charge a president while in office.
There are quite a lot of firsts, in this political chaos. There is also a sense that South Koreans in general, they have this mistrust, would you say, towards the probing process against the country's leaders. Is that a surprise?
It's not a surprise because as we heard from Yoon Suk's package, sadly, hand in hand with change in administration, we've always seen dubious sentiment among the public, whether our politician or the next president in line would be able to regain that trust. And it's also because we've had impeachment cases in the past. Only 2 presidents in Korea's history went through this process before, and that was back in 2004 with Roh Moo-hyun, the late Roh Moo-hyun. The National Assembly did pass a motion of impeachment over charges of election law violations. Of course, it did not pass through the Constitutional Court. But in late 2016, the country saw its first impeachment case against former President Park Geun-hye over influence peddling scandals. Now, the Constitution also upheld the motion, which forced her to be the first president in South Korea to be impeached. So South Koreans remember that although we are able to exercise our democratic rights as to voicing what we want from our presidents, in order for us to push that far, we have much distrust when it comes to a specific politician. Also, on to crimes, we've seen unfortunately, many of our presidents go behind bars, especially in the case of treason. 2 former presidents were found guilty after leaving office, though, and they were Chun Doo-hwan, a former general who came to power through a military coup, and then Roh Tae-hoo, who succeeded him as a president. Now, they were involved when South Korea was still in a military dictatorship and then passed the martial decree. And at the time, they sent armed troops to the city of Gwangju, which actually killed at least 200 people. And the figures are it's estimated that the figures are much bigger than that. But it remains a beacon of democracy and a turning point in South Korea's history from military dictatorship to democracy. And people remember that movement as a time where many lost their lives for South Korea's democracy. And the 2024 martial law, though it was only 6 hours, people are afraid. And you can tell because of the mistrust that they had in the past that revived again. And they were worried that that might be a rerun this time around. But fortunately, we didn't see that. And we're yet to see how this will play out.
Yeah, it's not surprising to see all the mass protests as well. Well, thank you so very much for stopping by. Grace Chin there. Now, in other news, world leaders have vowed to work for stability in Syria and the broader region following a lightning offensive by Syrian rebels that led to the ouster of President Bashar al-Assad. The deposed leader has reportedly fled to Moscow with his family. Japan's foreign minister says Tokyo is working with the international community to resolve the crisis, as he expressed concerns over the deteriorating humanitarian situation.
シリアにおける一連の事態の推移を重大な関心を持って注視をしております。シリアにおいて一刻も早く暴力が停止し、すべてのシリア人が基本的人権を共有し、自由と繁栄を享受できるようになることを強く望みます。
China, meantime, has called for a political solution to restore stability in Syria. The Syrian Prime Minister has called for free elections in the country and said that he was ready to cooperate with any leadership chosen by the people.
叙利亚的前途和命运应当由叙利亚人民来决定。我们希望各相关方本着对叙利亚人民长远和根本利益负责的原则，尽快找到恢复稳定秩序的政治解决方案。
The development in Syria could impact China's plans in the country and even further across the Middle East. Both the nations established a strategic partnership last year when Assad met Chinese President Xi Jinping in Hangzhou. China had previously pledged aid towards the rebuilding of Syria, but the renewed instability might make any significant moves on that front challenging. And for more, we are joined now by CNA's Tan Yu-Guan in Shanghai. Yu-Guan, how is China viewing this latest development?
Well, as you said, China is one of the few backers of Bashar Assad. And as you said, when he visited China last year for the Hangzhou opening ceremony of the Asian Games, China announced a strategic partnership with Syria. But that said, we need to note that China is referring to the country and not the regime. What China wants in Syria is stability. And that's because several of its state-owned energy firms have invested billions of dollars in oil and gas assets in Syria. And they're just waiting to see and for the situation to stabilize before they can return and make good on their investments. Earlier, I spoke to Xu Qingduo. He's a senior fellow at a Beijing-based think tank, and this is what he has to say about China's perspective of the situation in Syria.
China would love to see a stable and peaceful Middle East because peace and stability will serve the interests not only of every country in this region, but also the Chinese interests very well. For example, the Belt and Road Initiative, which is mostly about construction of infrastructure and connectivity between the peoples, between the different ports, with different, different sectors, for example. So, all for the implementation of such an initiative, you have to have peace and stability. I'll give you an example. China previously built the infrastructure with the idea of connecting China with countries in between with European countries. But because of the Ukraine war, basically, quite amount of that efforts basically was abandoned, right? So China does not like to see, uncertainty, instability, conflicts in this region. Of course, in that respect, China would love to see peace and stability prevail in Syria.
So, Yu-Guan, now that there is a new government in charge in Syria, how do you think China is likely to approach its relations with Syria moving forward?
Well, China has a very long-standing policy of not interfering with the internal affairs of other countries. And so long as the new government in Syria does not harm China's interests within Syria or within China, China would likely take a wait-and-see approach for the new government to settle down and form. Now, what are these interests? Among other things, China would need the new government to adhere to the one China policy and not build diplomatic relations with Taiwan, for example. And another one would be for the new government not to fan separatist movements within China where there's huge populations of Muslims. So long the new government does all that, China will see no reason not to build diplomatic relations with the new government. And for this, we do have a precedent in the form of Iraq, when there was a regime change in Iraq. Here's Mr. Xi again on how China is likely to deal with this regime change as it has dealt with Iraq.
If you can look at any example, that would be Iraq would be an example, right? China maintained relationship with the Iraqi government even let's say under Saddam Hussein, right? After the fall of Saddam Hussein, Iraq went through this democratic process. There's heavy influence of the U.S., of the West. China dealt it very well. China built a relationship with the Iraqi government. You see, in southern Iraq, there's a lot of Chinese investment in that respect, and the Chinese nationals even were working there. They have also enjoyed a very good relationship with the Iraqi people. So that might serve as an example. If there's a stability in the Syrian situation, and I'm sure if people see there's a long-term peace and stability, the Chinese investors would come to Syria and do their investment.
All right, so in a nutshell, China will be adopting a wait-and-see approach when it comes to Syria. Well, thanks so very much. CNA's Tan Yu Guan speaking to us from Shanghai. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Australia and Nauru strike a landmark security and economic deal aimed at countering China's growing influence in the Pacific region. And 93-year-old TSMC founder Morris Chang releases his new memoir, a look at the launch event after the break. China says it will firmly defend its sovereignty following Taiwan's military announcement that it had set up an emergency response center after it detected large numbers of Chinese naval and Coast Guard vessels operating near the Taiwan Strait. Nearly 90 Chinese ships were reported in the broader regions around the island. Well, Taiwan says it has initiated combat readiness drills and raised alert levels on its outlying islands. It claims Beijing has also set up 7 so-called air reserve zones until Wednesday. Over the weekend, China sent 14 warships, 7 military aircraft, and 4 balloons near Taiwan. Half a dozen Chinese aircraft crossed the median line of the Taiwan Strait, an unofficial demarcation zone between the two. China's military activities come amid speculation of a new round of war games in response to Taiwanese leader William Lai's recent visit to Pacific allies, including U.S. stops in Hawaii and Guam. Australia and Nauru have jointly announced an $89 million aid package in a move that could blunt China's growing influence in the region. Canberra is providing $64 million in direct budget support over 5 years and another $25 million for security. Now, the deal will give the Pacific Island nations security, banking, telecommunications, education, as well as health sectors a boost, and will also prevent third countries from tapping on Nauru's critical infrastructure for security purposes. Well, Canberra is also to remain as Nauru's primary security partner.
Australia is Nauru's largest economic, security and development partner. We view this partnership as a serious responsibility and a sign of the enduring respect between our two nations. Together, in the spirit of friendship and cooperation, Nauru and Australia developed this treaty guided by the best interests of both countries.
The aid package comes as China actively expands its diplomatic outreach in the Pacific. Earlier this year, China restored official relations with the island after persuading Nauru to cut its ties with Taiwan. Well, that prompted concerns in Canberra about China's expanding its diplomatic and commercial clout in a region. The Pacific Island nation, which measures some 20 square kilometers, is one of the world's smallest countries. Morris Chang, the legendary founder of TSMC, the world's largest chip maker, said that U.S. chip giant Intel did not consult him about its recent business woes. Mr. Chang made the comments in Taipei during a launch event of his autobiography. Asked about the troubled U.S. chip maker and the stepping down of Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger this month without a successor, Mr. Chang said that TSMC and Intel used to be on friendly terms, but the dynamic between the two companies has shifted in recent years.
后来几个CEO 都是很好的朋友，当然一直到最近的那个 CEO， 我觉得他有点好像是跟我们要敌对似的，可是他现在已经走路了，所以我也看了有些媒体在问。 他们有没有来consult过我？没有，我也不要他们consult我。我不要他们consult我，他们也没有来consult我。我想他们也不会要consult我，我也不要他们consult我。好，至于他们应该怎么办，我想他们现在我不知道他们是要再找。 一个新的策略了吗？还是要找新的 CEO？ 好像是两者他们都要找，既没有新的策略，也没有新的 CEO， 两者都要找。那这个是很难的，这个是很难的。
Well, the 93-year-old also revealed for the first time in his book that he once tried to recruit NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang to be his successor at TSMC. His offer was turned down, and according to Mr. Chang, one of the sticking points was Mr. Huang's NVIDIA stake.
其实，即使他那个时候，2013年吧，好像表示有兴趣的话，其实接下来的。 要过的关也是不少，它有7.5% 的技术股哦 ，NVIDIA 的是7.5%，全部股数的7.5%，那这个技术股那这个是有责任，应该是有责任的，那个是难道就会啪就走掉吗？即使是可以走掉，那。 这个7.5% 的 NVIDIA， 我们是不能让它台积电不能让它保留的，知道吧？那保留的话，又做这个台积电的 CEO 的话，他就会偏袒这个。我是没有任何这个重要客户的股票了，我自己。
Well, before we go, South Korea's popular Netflix series Squid Games is back with its highly anticipated second season. Well, the return comes as Seoul battles political chaos in real life, with the lawmakers last week scuffling with heavily armed soldiers in parliament to reverse martial law declared by President Yoon. The showrunner Hwang Dong-hyuk says that viewers will realize that the drama is not far from how we look at the world, adding that he was feeling heavy-hearted by what happened in the country, calling it unfortunate and infuriating. Squid Game is an ultra-violent tale exploring themes of division and inequality. It is considered to be one of the most significant works in solidifying South Korea's status as a global cultural powerhouse. The global release is set for 26th of December this month. And that does it for Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And look us up on Facebook and on YouTube. Thanks for watching.